The overriding factor is the continuing purchasing of physical bullion by central banks. And there doesn't seem to be any near-term reason to think that's going to change.
This is Kaiser Johnson with Liberty and Finance, and these are the Miles Franklin Weekly Specials for January 8th through January 15th, 2024, while supplies last. First this week, we feature backdated 1/4 ounce gold eagles at just $65 over melt. Next, the Armenian 1-ounce silver Noah's Ark coin is $3.49 over spot. And finally, we have a very limited quantity of 1-ounce silver Trump Wanted bars at $3.15 over spot. To order our specials or any of the many other options we have available, call us at 1-888-81-LIBERTY. That's 1-888-815-4237. We're available after hours and on weekends, and we look forward to speaking with you.
Hey everyone, this is Elijah K. Johnson with Liberty and Finance. And back with us today is our good friend Peter Grandich from Peter Grandich & Company. Peter, thank you so much for joining us today.
Always a pleasure, my friend.
Well, it's great to have you. Our first interview in the new year. I did want to ask you your outlook for 2024, but one thing that is in the news now, and it seems like really kind of gives it seems like we had kind of a false impression of how good the economy was. A lot of these jobs numbers back from last year have been revised. Your perspective on this and kind of the inflated numbers that we saw?
Yeah, so I was talking about that all last year. 11 of the 12 months were reduced lower, and the 12th month was just left alone for almost 500,000 less people than employed. And if you think about it, of those 11 months, 6 would have actually been down and a few others would have been far less than reported. And therefore, when they first came out as they were, the Biden administration, the economy is strong, Bidenomics is working. And then by the time they get readjusted, they're into the new fake number. And it's really shameful. I'm not the first to say this, but I said it for all of 2023. The BLS should just get rid of the L and just call themselves BS, because that's what it's really been. And remember, the Federal Reserve is supposed to be basing their decisions on these labor numbers, supposedly. And if that's the case, I don't know anybody, if I had anybody who was advising me and was wrong 11 out of 12 times, I don't know if they'd be working for me next year, Elijah. So it's very disconcerting. It gave a false opinion. It created all this Wall Street Goldilocks stuff. And that's what came together. The sort of market rallied saying everything was going to be hunky-dory again. And now as we start off the new year, people realizing that's just not the case. At least some are.
People, it seems like, are concerned about the stock market for this year. We still remain at pretty close to all-time highs. How long do you think that these prices will be sustained?
Well, Elijah, I got to toot my own horn, and I don't, that in my interviews, I don't like to do that. But 2 years ago, when we were ending 2021, I made a major decision for myself and anybody who wanted to listen. I said that we were entering the worst ever economic, social, and political era, which has gotten a lot worse, and we can talk about that in a little bit. So I didn't want to own any general equities that weren't related to natural resources. And instead, I actually suggested to people to own physical gold. I don't sell it. That's your business. I don't have any relationship with you. I don't get any pay by anybody other or anything like that. But I said that physical bullion was a worthy, better choice than equities, which was kind of unusual for people to hear. 2 years later, I want you to know gold is still outperforming the stock market over that period by a couple percent point. Now, everybody sees last year's rally, but they don't realize how much was lost the year before. And remember, when you lose 25% in 1 year, you have to almost go up double to make it back. And as much as the equity market is near its, like you said, all-time high. And here's the other surprise, and this is singing to the choir, but you're deserving to be sung to in this regard. If we went out now and talked to any 100 licensed financial advisors in any spectrum in any state and asked them this simple question: what since the new millennium has performed better, stocks or gold? 98 or 99 and would tell you the stock market, because that's what it seems like. It's going up and up. But the bottom line is gold has outperformed the stock market since the new millennium. And you would never know that based on the coverage it gets and what people speak about and all. And, to me, that's just more reasons to keep focusing now. Of course, if the day ever comes, I don't know if it ever can, because the financial community treats gold like kryptonite. It goes against the principles of financial assets and that, et cetera. But if we ever got to the point where we're going to parties and getting our haircuts and guys are telling us to buy gold, even then guys like you might want to think about, hey, maybe it's time to pull it in. But we're so far away from that. And yet gold has, for almost 25 years, outperformed what everybody thinks has been the best investment.
That is so interesting. Yeah. I mean, if you look at the prices based on since the beginning of the century, gold has outperformed pretty much any of the main indices there. Why isn't this kind of thing reported on? It's
treated, first of all, by the financial service industry as kryptonite. The financial media is mostly tied to the hips. Much of the financial media, the networks and all, make their living selling ad times and all to the very people that they're reporting on. So if they're not bullish on gold, don't expect them to be. That's like picking up Money Magazine, expect to read a negative article on mutual funds. It isn't going to happen. Then in recent times, gold got another hater, crypto nuts. I mean, basically anybody that's 30 or under that never even experienced the ownership of gold, never took the time to understand it, was thrust into this crypto mania. It's the greatest. Can I just tell you this? It is the single greatest hyped investment product in mankind. It puts tulip mania to shame. But there too was a group that, and thinks that they have to knock it because somehow if that money comes out of gold, it makes it better for them and all. So I call it the Rodney Dangerfield of all investments. I'm coming into my 40th year, and gold gets little or no respect across a wide spectrum, and even from the people that live it and breathe it sometimes, because it doesn't do all the things people are predicting sometimes, 5,000, 10,000, even they kind of throw it under the bus now and then. It is the least respected, yet has managed to do what it's supposed to do for a couple thousand years. It's an amazing phenomenon.
No, it seems like geopolitically, with everything that's going on, this should just be, it's not positive what's going on, but this should be positive for the gold price going forward. I know we just continue to see geopolitical turmoil beginning at the beginning of the year. We saw the U.S. and U.K. get involved in another conflict. There's airstrikes recently in Yemen. Your perspective on that and how it could play into the price of gold?
Elijah, those are okay, but they're not the main drivers, in my opinion, nor do I expect them to be the main drivers. The continuing singer's main driver is central bank buying, and part of that is because of what is happening, which still most on Wall Street pay no heed to and are going to pay a terrible price because of it, to understand what the formation of the BRIC nations is leading to. It was an afterthought, then it was just 5. Okay, now it's 10, maybe be 20. And I hear people scoff and say, it's these countries and nobody cares about them and so forth and so on. How wrong that is. And yet, two of the biggest parties within that group, Russia and China in particular, have been huge buyers of gold. And they're not buying it for a trade. They're not buying it for speculation. They're buying it because someday, somehow, in some form, gold will be used as part of their medium on how they're going to do business with one another. It may just be something regional, just among themselves, or maybe someday it will compete with or replace the U.S. dollar. That isn't any day soon, but that's what we're working to. And as we work through this, they continue to be aggressive buyers. So I think central bank buying and related to BRICS is the number one bullish thing for gold. The second thing is, and I think it's interesting, and maybe you don't like seeing that, but I think it will be important to you, is that people are willing to go into Costco and Walmarts and buy gold. And to think about that, even though it's not large sums of money, and basically they're almost using it as a loss leader because they're not, trying to profit from it. They're really just trying to found a way to attract people into business. The very fact that Americans now are willing to buy physical, understand this, the culture in Asia, it's a way of life of owning gold. Americans have no understanding unless, they go back 60, 70 years when we had the gold standard and all. So it was kind of interesting to see that there'd be such demand for that from retail people who basically aren't following the markets like you and I do. That's a plus. But again, the overriding factor is the continuing purchasing of physical bullion by central banks. And there doesn't seem to be any near-term reason to think that's going to change.
Now, what about Fed policy? Because I know a lot of people are confused by the recent price action, right? Where we're seeing the hiking of rates. The conventional wisdom would say this is bearish for gold. But that's not always the case. And it is interesting to even look at what might be coming in this year, 2024. A lot of rate cuts, it seems like, are on the table potentially. Your perspective on that, how Fed policy also plays into this? So
not too long ago, we were in the 1600s and interest rates were substantially lower than they are now. Gold's nicely over 2,000, remains above 2,000, which is a bullish thing for 2024. And yet interest rates went up 400%. So that argument of when rates go up, gold always goes down has been proven wrong more than once. Now, I'm not in the camp that thinks there's going to be a lot of interest rate cuts. They may have stopped, at least for now, or for the cycle, raising substantially. But I don't believe there's going to be a lot of interest rate cuts because the real inflation rate, and the Fed knows what the real inflation rate is because all they have to go back to is use how they used to calculate it in 1980 and 1990 before they changed it and massaged it so it would always come out lower than it really is. They know what the real number is. And quite frankly, I don't think they can get away with flooding the market anymore because here's why, and this is the other bullish factor for gold. The debt crisis has finally become what people have talked about for years, off in the distance, out there someday, maybe we should worry about it for our children or our grandchildren, is now front and center. We went up more in our debt in 4 years than we did the first 200 and something years. We went up $2 trillion in a year. I'm coming in my 40th year, Elijah. When I started, we didn't even have $1 trillion in long-term debt, period. Now we have multi-trillion-dollar budget deficits. And Congress still has not passed a legitimate budget. They keep doing it through resolutions. They can't even get together. And that's because neither side is willing to give on anything. So they do just enough. They spend more and they push the can down. And people are starting to realize that can is coming awfully heavy, Elijah. In fact, I think some of them are starting to kick it and their feet are going to hurt. And that's another concern what people have. And that ties into the last negative, I don't want to say negative, let's say resistance for gold, and that's the U.S. dollar and its performance. Because rates bumped up a little again, it rallied a little, and we were a little soft a couple of weeks on gold and all. But when this cycle, when people realize how bad we are financially, socially, and politically, and what's happening around the world with the BRICS and other places, the dollar's continuing losing its prestige will accelerate. And that last resistance of how some of the traders, particularly here in the CRIMEX, the COMEX, still use that strategy, will dissipate and disappear. And that's what's going to all coincide with gold getting above 2,100. So it's above every little top that everybody looks at. And once it's in that new world, so to speak, the momentum players and all the other things that happen when things are trading at levels they never traded it before will drive a very fast move and finally give silver a reason to have its own day in the sun, because it always still needs gold to break out first before silver can then follow up. And then at times during that largest part of the run, maybe even lead for a little while.
You mentioned how the inflation rate is a lot higher than it is reported to be. It's interesting because even if you look at the official numbers, it surprised a lot of the experts that the December inflation numbers were actually higher than expected. So your perspective on that, and moving forward, it seems like the Fed, in your view, just has to keep rates higher for longer.
Well, the CPI and the PPI had a fairly significant difference, and we'll have to see as things shake out and we get another month where that stands. What I just simply say is this. I think the Fed has one little reason to be a little bit more looser than possible, meaning if they were going to raise rates, kind of hold off if they can, because they don't want to do that during a presidential election. Now, my personal opinion was, and that's what gave the push in December for the stock market, was the way the chairman worded his his comment was bullish for stocks, but I think there was political pressure because the Biden economics argument was losing steam. And the way what he did and allowed the stock market to rally, and then the media reports that must mean jobs are good and the economy's good. I think the Fed will always try to balance itself, not to look like it's politically motivated. And quite frankly, that's why I don't think there's going to be as many cuts as people think. I think they're going to just try to stay as steady as they can go and maybe even push out the rate cuts into 2025 that many people thought were going to be in 2024. If I'm correct that the economy has the recession in 2024. I was never in the 2023 camp, but I've been in saying 2024 we'll see a recession, and we never know that until 6 months after the fact. So I'm not looking for the Fed to be as a big of a player on rates, both cutting or raising, as some others are.
Now, when it comes to the Fed keeping rates higher for longer, I mean, that plays into the national debt, though, that you mentioned before, because a lot of this debt is going to have to be reissued at higher rates. So what does this mean for the country and for those concerned about the national debt?
Well, that's beyond anything plausible that can be fixed. It will take a crisis, as I've described in my New Year's podcast, that will make the Depression be a walk in the park. When this is all said and done, when this finally comes apart, all those dire forecasts that people said, oh, I heard you guys for 20 years saying that. Well, it's at hand now. We have the perfect storm. There's a whole bunch of issues, retirement crisis, political paralysis, an immigration scenario that's spilling over to become one of the most formidable problems we ever face, because now day-to-day Americans are being impacted by it. We saw the beginning of it by a school having to be emptied out so immigrants can go while kids had to be forced back home. Once the American life is being impacted by this, it's standing up. First, it started to stand up when they started to come to cities where beforehand those cities said, yeah, you're welcome, until they showed up. But now when it starts to impact day-to-day people, so all these factors that are happening, Elijah, really are setting up a scenario to me where I believe, this is my motto in our planning group, this is what I tell people whether they want to listen or not. Don't focus so much on capital appreciation. Focus a lot on capital preservation. That's why the products that you're involved with fit that mold. Gold should always be first a preservation investment. There are points, and then there's other ways through mining shares and things like that to look for appreciation. But preservation and protection are more of a viable reason for me, at least, to own gold. And never has that reason been more acute than it is right now.
Now, on your website, I know that you have a pamphlet available that really goes over biblical perspectives on money matters, right? And one of the things that you've talked about is debt. Now, in these hard financial times, a lot of people are running up credit card debt. What are some ways that people should think prudently about this? And if you wanted to bring kind of a biblical perspective into this, in these tough times, how do people stay out of debt?
Well, I'm glad you give me that opportunity, because there aren't a lot of financial networks that allow me to really, the focus of at least half my career has been built on a foundation of biblical factors on how to handle money. So the Holy Bible, which some of us think is the Word of God, and some just think it's a great historical book, but no matter how you look at it, it doesn't have a positive verse about debt. Anything related to debt are warnings or concerns expressed. And it's obvious now we can see that. There's an old, very secular, not a Christian man at all, but he was a comedian that did a great skit, George Carlin, called Too Much Stuff. And part of the problem that got us here is we fell in love with the idea that more stuff equals more happiness. Wall Street and Madison Avenue has always sold their wares in that regard. If you can make more money, and by the way, we can help you do it, you can have more stuff and you'd have more happiness. For a lot of years, I stated that even if it was no fault of their own, they were the poster child for what's wrong with America, and that's public storage facilities. Because, Elijah, your parents and grandparents, they never needed public storage. They lived in smaller dwellings. They had less stuff. And every medical psychiatric study says we're more a mess now than our parents or grandparents' generation. So stuff and things, it's very, very hard because we live in a generation, especially for the younger youth now, where everything is driven by what we see and what we see on social media, what people are wearing, what we try to, have it all. And people are sold that way. But there's nothing biblically supporting that. I always tell people, and this has been for at least 20 years, my motto, less is more. I can honestly look you in the face and say, I live a lifestyle less than I could if I wanted to. But there's a peace of mind that, especially when you meet people that were once in a lot of debt and they either lowered it to be manageable or got out of it. And they talk about a feeling and a sense of chains being taken off of them at all. And that's what it really is. And, there's scripture that tells us, that basically describes that. But we're also called upon for those that are in a good position to show some leniency to those who do get themselves into debt. Now, I don't think people should be able to walk away from it. I don't think student loans should just be canceled, especially when it's America's single largest asset on our books. But I do think that we need to recognize that less is more. I think if we can get to that level, if you can assume that you don't need all the things that the world tells you need, life does become easier, because life still, whether you're Christian or another faith or secular, revolves around money. Money is a medium that makes the world go round. But as a Christian, we always have to remember this. God told us to be in the world, but not of the world. And when you're of the world, that's when you get caught up in thinking more money equals more happiness. Let me just say this. This is very important in my world, Elijah. Wall Street and Madison Avenue would always sell the thought that the bus owner is always happier than the guy that drives the bus for that man or woman that owns the company. When in fact, some of the happiest people are people with little or no amount of wealth. And if wealth was the answer, then all these people that we hear that make millions and tens of millions of dollars that end up into all sorts of issues, from all sorts of addictions to suicide and all, proves that that is not the road to happiness. So do a lot of people want to hear this? No. Could I have had this same conversation you've blessed me to have right now on a major financial network? No. So it's something you need to seek and feel motivated to look at. And in our Catholic faith, and I pick on my Catholic brethren at time compared to the Protestant community that I also worked in, I tell them to go home, blow the dust off of that book, start to read it. And even if you just went and Googled and asked Google, what does the Bible say about debt? You'll learn a lot of things, and you'll learn that maybe even some of the things you're doing now, you can do it less of or not at all.
I think some very good points there. And one that you stress also in the pamphlet that you can download on your website there is to figure out what do you want and what do you need, right? And to make that distinction. You might want to go out to a nice restaurant for dinner, but do you really need it? And I think in these tough times, everyone is in a different financial situation. But it's good to distinguish that. And even if we can live in abundance, to remember that we don't have to always.
Well, let me just also say, because I would fall short if I didn't, and that is, there is one investment that always works. And you're not supposed to guarantee investments, but I will guarantee this. It's called tithing. And tithing is something that's particularly difficult for the Catholic community because there's no teaching of it whatsoever. At least in the Protestant community, there is some, especially in the a certain sect that thinks God calls you to make all sorts of money, which is Christian prosperity, which is not the case. But tithing is a phenomenal investment. It's the only part, there's only one book in the entire Bible, Malachi, where God actually challenges and tells you that challenges you to tithe, and what he promises, if you tithe, what will be returned to you. And tithing isn't always necessarily money. It can be done through sweat equity, but it's truly giving up and giving to God first a portion of these gifts that we have in our stewardship. And it can be very, very tough when things are when you can't even maybe put gas in your car and somebody's telling you to drop a few dollars into the box on Sunday. But God says, if you do so, he will return it tenfold. And I've seen it. That's what turned my life around. I've seen it with so many others who actually follow it. There's also a wonderful Protestant preacher who passed recently named Dr. Charles Stanley. And it's on Google. It's called God and Money. So if you put in Dr. Charles Stanley, God and Money, everybody, Catholic and Protestant, should watch it. It's a really great teaching about tithing and what will happen if you do. So I'm glad you afforded me this opportunity to share that.
And if our viewers are interested in learning more, they can go to petergrandich.com. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, there's a section there called Suggested Readings, and those pamphlets about scripture and my book and all that stuff can be there. I'm mostly on Twitter. I spend more time on Twitter now. It's a much easier and faster way to communicate. And obviously, I have a YouTube channel where I put up interviews that I do, such as the one you blessed me with today.
Well, thank you so much, Peter. Any last thoughts before I let you go?
I just think that this year is really the year of concern. I don't want to be an alarmist, but we really are seeing too many things converge, and there's no quick fix or easy way out of it. And I think, as I said earlier, capital preservation going forward is more important to be focused on than capital appreciation.
Fantastic, Peter. Thank you so much for your time, as always, and God bless.
Thank you, Elijah. God bless you, too.
This is Kaiser Johnson with Liberty and Finance, and these are the Miles Franklin Weekly Specials for January 8th through January 15th, 2024, while supplies last. First this week, we feature backdated 1/4 ounce gold eagles at just $65 over melt. Next, the Armenian 1 ounce silver Noah's Ark coin is $3.49 over spot. And finally, we have a very limited quantity of 1 ounce silver Trump Wanted bars at $3.15 over spot. To order our specials or any of the many other options we have available, call us at 1-888-81-LIBERTY. That's 1-888-815-4237. We're available after hours and on weekends, and we look forward to speaking with you.